All right, welcome to the Movie Pope podcast where we discuss all different types of movies and TV shows. And today we are going to discuss Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Now, I should note that we initially did the recording last week, but due to some technical difficulties, the first episode, for whatever reason, the file got corrupted. So we're re-recording it again, and this time everything is working as expected. Lee, I should let you know right off the bat, when when I found out that the whole thing had been messed up, I literally had to take my computer apart, replace the hard drive and everything to make sure that everything was functioning. I should have known when my computer was running really, really slow that something was going to be off, so I didn't. I should have been a bit more attentive to that. But yeah,
Hey,
let's.
no worries. We're gonna crush it a second time, so we can only do better from here. So
And I think too, for this episode, we kind of know what the main talking points are, so everything should kind of go a bit more smoothly this time around. So, um, so for starters, we saw the movie last month. Was it like the first Saturday? What were
yeah,
your impressions of it overall?
yeah. So I think as far as the movie goes, I mean, I really liked the first one. Right, second one wasn't quite as good. This one I kind of felt was kind of in that I enjoyed it, but I don't feel like it had the same. It didn't hit me the same, or I didn't enjoy it as much as the first one. So I think kind of the big things that I feel like just didn't really work for me too well was one, the story was a lot more dark than I was expecting.
Yeah.
Which I think if you like, if I was just looking at this as a standalone movie, I'd be like, wow, like they really knew how to kind of create this villain with kind of like all this, kind of visual concerning stuff that we see with like animal abuse and everything like that. So like you really know how to create a villain like that, because it's funny how like we could watch movies nowadays. We can see villains kill hundreds, if not like, with Thanos, he can kill half a population. And we're like, huh, that kind of sucks. But when you watch four animals get experimented on, and obviously a lot more other experiments, but we kind of focus on four, it's funny how much like that impacts people more than everything else that technically happened.
Yeah,
Um,
it is kind of odd because if you think about it, like when I watched the movie, those scenes when they were imprisoned, I felt a lump in my throat,
oh
um,
yeah,
and I was like, man, this really hits me right here, like the way they're being treated. I mean, and I'll mention this too. When I was in school, I did a double major in film and international studies, and I can't tell you how many films I saw where we were just watching like documentaries on people who survived like all these traumas. I'm just like sitting there rolling my eyes. I'm like, okay, they're laying on pretty thick, but here it's like, oh my god, this is awful.
yeah, I know. It's so interesting how and like it's just interesting how that's the reaction I think a lot of people get. I mean, we went with two other people, and one of them she cried during a lot of those scenes, which
See, I
like I
didn't know
said, it
that.
just goes to show you that. And like this is something that, I mean, you probably have like a younger audience for, so I can imagine that I think kids walking into this might not really expect, or I guess parents they're bringing the kids to this probably don't expect to see something like that being depicted, and that might kind of ruffle some people is how that's all going. So
Yeah.
but I think as far as like a movie goes, I thought it was stronger than the other entries, just because I enjoyed like having the villain involved. They had like something very cohesive happening with it. It felt a lot more like they really wanted to have a strong movie. But I think when I go to see Guardians, and I think when a lot of fans go to go see Guardians, we kind of enjoy more of the humor, kind of the comedy that's involved with it. And this one just didn't feel like it hit those notes as well as certainly the first one, or even the second one. It just I think the story just kind of, while was I think a good aspect of it. I just think that the overall tone of it didn't really match up what we've seen in other Guardians movies. So
But to be
that's just where I was with that. How about what did you think about it?
to your point, but to be fair, with with the projects that we've seen in the other phases of Marvel so far, they've gotten a bit more darker. So I mean, like we can look at something like WandaVision, Loki, even Spider-Man: No Way Home. There's a bit of a much more darker tone. So if you think about it, yes, Volume 3 is a bit of an anomaly in the overall Guardians franchise, but in terms of the way that Marvel's been going over these past few years, it's kind of on par for the course, really. I will say this. It was an emotional ending to the trilogy. I felt it was very fitting, but at the same time, I felt like there was a lot a lot more that they could have done with that. A lot more elements that maybe they could have toned down on. Maybe a few storylines that they really kept laying it on over and over again. Like for instance, Quill kept saying, come on, Gamora, you have to remember who I am. Even though it was established, she has no idea of who he is, and the fact that he keeps egging her on and egging her on. I remember sitting there just thinking, dude, let it go. She doesn't know who you are. This is a completely different person. And it's not like this Gamora resurrected from the dead, and all of a sudden she's like, "Oh, Peter, oh, I'm starting to remember things about you. I remember that you and I had a thing." The biggest payoff I enjoyed really was the fact that we finally got to see a different side of Nebula, because it was a story arc that began with the first Guardians movie. It it it, it developed even more in Volume 2, and then you saw her come into her own in the two Avengers movies. And finally, you see her get the closure that she's finally wanted, and Drax also. Drax finally gets the closure that he's been longing for, also, because you remember in the first movie, his whole motivation for being in the Guardians, well, initially was to get revenge against Ronan, and Thanos for killing his family, and at the end, he finally gets the family that he's been looking for, because we've always known that the Guardians was always going to be a temporary thing. It's like with the Avengers. The Avengers, they weren't going to be this continual thing, this continual entity that would go out and meet these threats. They came together, they did their thing, and they went their separate ways. And I feel like with Nebula and Drax, I feel like those are the two who got the biggest payoff. Quill, I feel like it's kind of up in the air. I feel like there are some things that should have been resolved, but they're leaving that door open, which I can sort of understand from a business standpoint. But
Yes.
I feel like with Quill, there's only so much you can do with the character. And for me, I feel like he was the one character who kind of felt the least developed in that movie, to be honest with you.
Oh,
Because
I agree with that.
Because think about it, what was he doing at the beginning of the movie? He was getting hammered the entire time, and he sort of like steps into the role of leading the Guardians, but it kind of felt like he felt very one dimensional. What did you think about Quill in this one?
Gosh, I think you bring up a great point there. I think we've kind of it's complicated, right? Because I think from a movie going standpoint, right? Like if you're somebody that really likes the Guardians, right? You've seen one where you bring this kind of band together, like he obviously has a thing for Gamora. You see that start to really get developed in the second one, and it feels very awkward when you get to the third one, where it's kind of like they want to hit the reset button. And obviously, I understand storytelling wise that makes sense, because we know what happens to Gamora during the Avengers movies.
Yeah.
So we understand from an audience how that's working. I just think from like a storytelling standpoint, it does put all the characters kind of in an awkward place, because I think for a lot of people, or let me not speak for everyone, right? I know for myself, I was kind of hoping to see a little bit more of their bond being rekindled, and they just kind of leave it open to interpretation, or kind of leave it open to them trying to like maybe form a bond again. But as you go through the movie, like obviously Gamora is a very, it's a different person. It's not the Gamora that we know. But as an audience member, right, like I've seen Gamora, I've seen what she's about, and I've seen who she is. And it just feels like we're seeing somebody totally different, which, like I said, movie telling wise, that's exactly what's happening. But as someone that's viewing this, I just don't really know how to feel about that. And it just felt kind of odd that, like you pointed out, like there was a very, very, very long, like everything was just, Peter Quill kind of just sitting there kind of dumping out his emotions, which, I would understand, right? Like, I mean, this is someone that he had a very strong connection with. And while, rationally speaking, we know that, this is not the Gamora that, he fell in love with, it still just feels very awkward when we see it kind of depicted like this, where they pretty much just kind of like clash the whole time. And the whole time I'm thinking, like, eventually, like, she's going to warm up a little bit. And I think there is a little bit of that happens towards the end. But it just felt like it kind of ended with, like, hey, we're just going to go our separate ways. So it kind of made all the story beats that happen with him feel like it was as important, or you don't see that growth like we see from someone like a Nebula or someone like a Drax, who definitely went through more and had to overcome that.
It kind of felt like felt like a bait and switch if you think about it, because this entire time you're just thinking, oh man, they're gonna get together. Gamora's finally gonna come and see it, and then no, she goes back to the Ravagers, and you're like, what the hell, dude? Like, you strung us along, and this is what we get. Like, come on, like, give us something.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was kind of the frustrating part for me. And like I said, like, I'm not expecting them just to like rekindle or have everything come together at the end. And I wasn't expecting that. I didn't really think that was needed. But it would have been fun if at the end, instead of her going with the Ravagers, she would have been like, you know what? Hey, maybe I'll give this Guardians thing a try, or maybe I'll see what you guys are about. Like, that was kind of the ending I was hoping to see. And like I said, I think that's more for myself, wanting maybe the happier ending than maybe the more realistic one. But really, that's what I was hoping, because at least then I can understand, like, hey, Peter Quill, he went through all this. He went through this struggle. He really put it out there. And, at least at the end, he kind of had this moment where you could kind of see just the slightest hint of hope. But it feels like that was all kind of sucked out. And I think that was the part that really kind of stuck out to me, because at the end, like, he goes back to Earth. And like the whole time I'm thinking, like, does he really care that much about his grandfather? Like, I didn't really believe that. It just felt like it was like a story beat that was put in this story. Like, obviously we know he has a very strong connection with his mom. So like, I, totally understand that, but like, it just didn't feel like that was I would say a worthy kind of satisfaction for the character. It was like,
it kind of got shoehorned in there. It's like, what else can we add in there?
Yeah, so, exactly.
So let me ask you this, because I was thinking about the all of this week. Do you think the story would have been okay without Gamora being involved at all? Because I felt like you could have had you still could have had a great Guardians movie without Gamora in there, because the way I see it, she really didn't add much to it, apart from being just this canvas where Quill could just spill his emotions out and make a fool out of himself.
Oh, that's a great one. You know what? Honestly, deep down, I would say yes, but I feel like as if you're a fan of the Guardians, she's back, and it would just be awkward if she wasn't involved. Like, it just feels like it'd be like, hey, like, we see at the end of Endgame, we see her, back in the picture and everything. It just feels like that would have been more. I don't think it would have gelled well knowing that she exists, but we don't see her in the Guardians. I get where you're coming from, and I do think that there's a part of me that says, like, at the end of the day, I don't know if her being a part of the story really enhanced a whole lot of it.
Yeah.
But in that same token, I feel like the movie, it almost like you had to have her in there because it would just be too awkward if she wasn't. Because I think every fan would just be like, well, where's Gamora? Like, we're all wanting to see what happens at the next stage of this relationship or whatever you want to call it. And I just feel like it would have been too hard to not include her. And it just felt like it wouldn't feel like the Guardians again. At least that's how I look at it.
Right. So yeah, because in my mind, I was thinking, I mean, it made sense that for Gamora to go off and do her own thing, joining the Ravagers and becoming a head honcho over there and helping them out. I felt, but I did feel like there were some scenes where maybe she wasn't really that needed as a player. I would probably say towards the end of the movie, honestly, because I felt like I felt like she fit well at the very beginning of the movie where she helped them get into that that corporation building, and I felt like at that point she could have just bowed out and she would have been like, "Hey, great knowing you guys, we're working with you, peace out." I felt like I felt like she kind of overstayed her welcome at that point. You know what I mean? But that's I don't know that was just running through my head as I was thinking about that. So I want to shift towards the villain. Now, I remember after the movie, I remember saying that the High Evolutionary was like a different version of Thanos, just because he was single-minded. He had this he had this drive, this motivation to want to create perfection. But the way he did it was very much different from the way that that Thanos was doing it. Although in both instances they ended with genocide. Not to mention the fact that he wore purple. What was your impression of the High Evolutionary?
I I would say he definitely. I mean, when he was on this, when he was in a scene, he ate that scene up.
Oh yeah,
Like every time he was on there, like I was just like, oh damn, I can't wait to see how absolutely batshit crazy this guy is gonna be and what he's gonna do. So I did find him very entertaining to watch, and I think to kind of like what we talked about earlier, like, we kind of see him going about, like kind of the animal abuse and like what he did in order to try to create this perfect idea. Like, obviously, this character has a strong god complex. And I mean, we see it later on too, when he literally blows up the planet because he's unhappy with it. So he's someone that can create all this, go through all this effort to, kind of create this world and everything and inhabit it. And then he's just as easily just like, he could throw it all away and start again. So like, he's a character that clearly has a very, very different understanding of what he's wanting to get out of the world. And like, obviously he doesn't care what he has to do or who he has to harm in order to get through that. So I think, it does make him as a villain, it makes him very despicable, which I think a lot of people are going to gravitate towards, because it's like, oh man, like this guy's a real, asshole. Like, we want it. Like, I think it gives people that more of an edge as you get towards the end. Like, you're just like, man, I just really want to see them kick this guy's ass. Like, we really want to see this guy get taken out here. So I think that definitely plays a part in it. So I'll give them some props. Like, it wasn't, like I said, it had its flaws as far as the movie goes. And I think the villain, I would have liked to see maybe a little bit more understanding of, like, maybe not necessarily like a true origin story, but I think it would have been nice to see a little bit more development as far as like his ideologies and everything like that.
Yeah, he was very one-dimensional. So
yes, no, I agree, and sometimes that's not an issue. I think a lot, I do generally enjoy like those villains where there's more to the character. It's not black and white. So sometimes it's good. I think in this one, like, they really went out to create this character that everyone was going to despise, and I think they did that and then some. Because I don't think there's anyone that was like, hey, yeah, this High Evolutionary, yeah, you know what? Maybe I could understand his reasoning or I could understand his logic. It's like, no, this guy's just kind of a terrible person. And I think it just kind of helps out that as you're drawing up the conclusion, especially with Rocket, them having that kind of final altercation is just like, we're just ready to see him, kind of get his comeuppance, so to speak.
I mean, I'm with you because at least with Thanos, I mean, however warped his worldview is, you can sort of understand where he's coming from. The same with Killmonger in the Black Panther films. Even Obadiah Stane in the first Iron Man movie, you can sort of understand where he's coming from, which motivates what he's doing, you know. And yes, I am taking that position, but I mean, well, like with the high evolutionary, it's like, yeah, we get it. You're deranged. You want to create a perfect society. You want to be this total badass. You're essentially God. But why are you doing all of this to begin with? Because because remember later on in the movie, like when he finds out that his quote unquote perfect society isn't as perfect as Quill points out, he's like, "No, yeah, that's true. I'll just create a new one," and he blows it up.
Yeah.
But but yeah, to your point, I mean, like if we at least if he at least like give us like a hint or an idea as to why he was doing this in the first place, because we know why because we know why he created Counter Earth. It's because he wanted it populated with highly evolved animals, and this was due to the experiments he was doing on Rocket and the others before realizing, oh, there's a better way to perfect the process. But I would have loved to have seen what kind of motivated him to start experimenting on animals in the first place. Did he try to do something with humanoid creatures? First of all, he didn't find that satisfactory, and then that kind of made him decide, maybe I should start with animals, create a much better template from them, and kind of go from there. But we never get that, and I think that's the problem with, and I think with Marvel overall, yes, I mean, they do give us some villains, but they don't really give us any compelling villains that we can that have any impression on us. I mean, you remember the Dark Knight movies that Christopher Nolan did? I mean, my God, like the movie was made in what, 07 or something, 07 or 08. He still has staying power to this day. I mean, how many memes do you see of people just just taking public figures and jokerizing them? You really don't see that with any of the Marvel villains. I think the sad thing is that with the High Evolutionary, he becomes the latest villain that just gets used and then tossed aside into the into the dustbin of characters that we've used and we can forget about.
Sure. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, I kind of look at, just him and the overarching kind of like Marvel villains, and I do agree. Like, he's someone where obviously stuck out really strong in that movie, but I don't, like I said, he kind of will go out of my brain and move on in the world. And I probably won't think about him as far as being a villain in the future because he didn't really have that sustaining power. I think in the movie, he's kind of a great ploy to help build all this character around Rocket, who, we know has this troubled background. As far as his origin story goes, we just never seen it depicted before. So I think he does a great job of, making us really root for Rocket. But as far as him as a villain, he's going to kind of fall to the wayside. I think as we move forward with a lot of the other Marvel villains.
So what did you think about Rocket's role in the movie? Because honestly, apart from the flashbacks, he really doesn't play that big of a role. He's just out the entire time.
He is unconscious a lot of it, absolutely. So I mean, I think I really kind of enjoyed his story. I think it kind of helps us understand more about his character and kind of the way he acts. And I think, we kind of see how much family really means for all these characters, right? Like you brought up, like, you think about to when we discussed Nebula, right? Someone that was, her father tortured her for long periods of time. She's looking for a family. We mentioned Drax and how, he fought Ronan at the beginning because Ronan killed his family, and how he kind of has that moment at the end. So I think, like, we see this really strong thing with Rocket as well, that we see his tortured past, the fact that, he was, experimented on, he had kind of this, I don't want to say father figure with the High Evolutionary, but like he kind of, had this, kind of understanding or this belief in what the High Evolutionary was trying to do, because the High Evolutionary is promising, like, oh yeah, we'll create this nice, utopia of a world for all of you guys that you'll be able to go to. So he really believes in that, when we know the High Evolutionary is just saying that for the sake of it. So we see kind of Rocket as he builds this close bond with this people who I would consider his family, right? I would consider those like 3 other animals a part of his family.
Yeah.
And they get killed, right? And I think that's like something where Rocket understands now like what loss is, because he watched his family die right in front of him. And I think that kind of builds up in this movie where it's like, hey, Rocket's been always looking for that family as well. And he finally gets that. And we can kind of see at the end where he becomes kind of the new head of the Guardians, so to speak, at the end of it. And I think that just kind of goes better with that motif that we see why he is the way he is. We see that he ultimately, too, had a family taken away by him from somebody. And now he has this opportunity to kind of start over and almost kind of like have that trust again. Because I think, when he has everything go on, he doesn't want to have people brought into his life because he doesn't want to lose them.
It's very much like, well, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
it's very much like Good Will Hunting. When Will, when Will explains to the
Yes.
doctor about what happened. I mean, because really, like in the other Guardians movies, he's built up this barrier between him and everybody, so he doesn't have to go through that again. And it's very much the same as what you see in Good Will Hunting, where we find out that he was horribly abused as a child, and so so he kind of has this shell that he's in, and he potentially causes all these problems because he would rather be the one inflicting the hurt rather than the one being hurt himself. So there's a lot of parallels you can go between him and that character. That's what struck me with that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that there is a lot of that. Like, he's someone that's with Rocket, he's really suffered a lot of loss, and I think that there's obviously a lack of trust, right? Like, he was really relying on, him being able to do this and kind of create this utopia that they would be able to coexist in, and pretty much all that got shattered in a very short time frame. So I had imagined, like, that's kind of in the back of his mind, the whole time. It's just like, oh, these Guardians, are they going to really be around? Or, am I going to have to see them go goodbye? So I think, like, he keeps everyone a little bit at arm length from time to time. And I think that as, he kind of goes through this, I think this is him being able to kind of escape that past and feel more comfortable and confident with being able to have a future where he can just trust people and not always have in the back of the head that, anything that he loves is going to die. So I think that does play very well in this movie. And I think that was the biggest highlight for me, was just be able to see him overcome that, because yes, for all intents and purposes, he is pretty much a cop.
You there? You faded out.
I'm sorry, what was that, Luka?
No, I was saying you just faded out. What was that you were saying? You said he was a con.
No, I was just saying that it just felt like as he kind of went through this struggle, and the fact that we got to see him at the very end kind of be able to kind of overcome that, and I think just be okay with him be able to work with all these people again and have kind of that, he doesn't have to fear losing them, or at least he's not as worried about that. It allows him to be, a stronger character, which I think that does bode very well. Kind of the mantle being passed from him becoming the new kind of leader of the Guardians, I think kind of shows that growth and that development.
Yeah. Now, speaking of Utopia, I do want to segue into the Sovereign. We we saw them at the beginning of Volume 2 with Aisha, and at the end of the movie where they look at the cocoon with Adam Warlock, and then obviously we get the introduction to Adam in thoughts on Aisha and Adam Warlock.
Yeah, I think for Adam Warlock kind of was odd to me in this movie. I know why they wanted to bring him in. You know, they kind of hinted at the end of, you know, the second one. So we all kind of knew he was.
Were you there? Well, well, I was gonna say this. I felt like with Adam, the the actor who portrayed him, Will Poulter, I thought he did a phenomenal job, given what he had to work with. I will say that that childlike demeanor that he had, I thought, yeah, all right, that's sort of some of the humorous element that they introduced in there. But I felt like for the most part there were some elements of Adam that some elements of Adam that I felt like that they could have kind of toned down on. Um, the big one for me was the fact that when he goes and attacks the Guardians at the beginning of the movie, you initially think, oh, he's this fully developed, powerful being who was created by the Sovereign to fight the Guardians, and as a result, when you see him in the movie, he is, he's you come to find out, oh, well, he's actually this childish character, and in the process, he come in the process you come to find out, oh, well, he wasn't actually fully developed. He was kind of taken out of, I guess, quote unquote, the womb too soon, um, which would sort of explain his demeanor. But the thing that the thing about Adam Warlock for me, what I'll say this, what I really liked about him was the fact that um for the limited amount of time and role that he had in the movie, he did a pretty good job in playing up some of the humor, but I felt the humor was kind of forced in some places. I felt like it's kind of like that person who has awkward comic timing. That's that's what I think of Adam right there. I kind of feel like when there are moments where he's being funny, it's like, really, this is the time you choose to be funny? Like, all right, you're young, you're still developing. I'll give you that. Um, and given the length of the movie too, I honestly wouldn't expect much in terms of development, because if they do another Guardians movie, and I strongly believe that they might do it just because it's one of the highest grossing franchises in Marvel. There'll be a chance for us to see Adam kind of develop into a much bigger role, and maybe develop his character from being just this overpowered creature to someone who's trying to figure out who he is and what he does. Because because in continuing with the theme of loss and family, Adam did lose his mother. He did lose Aisha
Yes.
in that explosion on Counter
Mhm.
Earth. So so for me, if they do another movie, or if they do like a spin-off series, or even a one-off special on Disney, that would be interesting to see how Adam processes grief, because because in all three Guardians movies, we've seen how each of these characters, well, how each of the Guardians have dealt with grief on their end. So with Adam in particular, I would be interested to see how he would develop, as a person, how he processes, the loss of his mother. Not necessarily his people, because I'm assuming he hasn't really had a chance to know the rest of the Sovereign. but we know he has a very close relationship with Aisha. So to lose her in the way that he did, that has to make you think. I mean, is this going to make him a more aggressive creature? Is Rocket going to take on a more of a fatherly role? Because if you think about it, Rocket actually did a pretty good job in helping Thor get through his grief in Infinity War. So that would be a very interesting dynamic to see how Rocket, who has finally come to terms with the loss, in his past, help Adam, come to terms with dealing with the loss of his family, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think Adam Warlock, the way he was kind of injected in the movie, I felt was very awkward. He had obviously a very strong entrance into it, but the whole time, he felt like a third wheel in the story, and I think that the story kind of felt kind of bloated as is. Like you're trying to take on too much, and it just kind of fell to the wayside for me. We have a lot going on. We have the Guardians. We have all of Rocket's backstory. We have, Peter Quill and Gamora trying to get back together. So you have all these types of story beats that you're trying to come up with this conclusion in this third and final movie. And then you added Adam Warlock, which I totally get. Like, he kind of has to be brought into it after you kind of hinted at in the second one. So you do have to bring Adam Warlock into this world. But the way he's kind of does it, it felt awkward. Like, I think Will Poulter, did a great job of portraying him. Like, I think, like, what he was given, he did a great job with it. I just don't know, in the grand scheme of things, what they really wanted to do with that character. So it's kind of like, I guess, for me, it's kind of like, it's like almost like his story. If they do tell things in the future, it'll be more interesting to see how they handle his story, because I think like his kind of being brought into the Guardians movies just kind of felt like almost like something they had to do for the sake of doing it, but they didn't really know what to do or how to implement it in the story. There was just, I think, too much going on. There was too much you're trying to deal with. And I think that was like one of the weaker elements of it, is them trying to bring him along and trying to do something with his character.
Yeah.
It felt like he was there. And then obviously, there was like a large segment of it where it's just like, I don't even remember what happened with them. I think I just know he shows up at the end to save Peter. And it felt like, oh yeah, well, let's just have, let's go have Adam Warlock go save him or something, because he hasn't been in the movie for 45 minutes now. So
yeah,
they kind of threw him in there because they didn't know what else to do with him. And I will admit, like, I did like kind of what they do, the group hug, and Adam Warlock's just like standing in the background, and he kind of comes in, and I was like, you know what, that's a cute moment. I like that. That was fun to see him do that as the character goes, but just like, oh yeah, like you brought him in, and I think they purposely kind of made him not like he is in the comics, but I think in the comics he's depicted as like much stronger, has a lot more going for them. I think they purposely wanted to have kind of a lesser version of Adam Warlock to keep him kind of more grounded in the story. So
yeah,
they kind of completed that. It just was not the high point of the story.
I mean, and I don't know what you think about this, but I think, but I think with where they're going with Adam Warlock, I mean the reason why they made him the way he is because, and I mentioned it already, is I have a strong feeling that they're going to do more with the Guardians universe, sans James Gunn, and they want to have like a general framework of who Adam is, so whoever steps in can sort of put their own twist on the character.
Yep. Totally agree with you on that.
So another thing, I definitely want to move on to a scene that we think might have been too much for the movie. I guess we could call it a WTF moment. For me, it was when Nowhere got piloted through that wormhole and came to the rescue of the Guardians on the ship. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, they could actually fly this thing the entire time. They couldn't, so they didn't fly it when they had to deal with Ego. They flew it when they had to rescue everybody from the ship. Because in my mind, I was thinking, there could have been a lot of instances where Nowhere could have, come into play and been a huge help to everybody. But all right, now we know that Nowhere could be flown. Was there a WTF moment in the movie for you?
I mean, that definitely was one. I will admit that was a big surprise. I mean, I guess like in a story wise, like they have this very, gotta save everything. They save the people, they save the kids, and then they save the animals. So there's kind of all that stuff going on. So I think that is a kind of a very good example of a moment I really wasn't expecting to see.
Yeah.
I think kind of the whole the whole thing. What was the name? Like the literally fleshy space station, right? Do you remember? Did they have a name for it? I forget.
It was, yeah, I think it was called Org Core.
Okay, yeah. So that whole kind of like side mission, like I know it was kind of like to help reintroduce Gamora and everything. It definitely just kind of felt odd how it all kind of worked out, because ultimately they go there to try to find something. They find it just to find out that, oh, we need to do something else. So it kind of felt like, I don't want to say filler, but it just didn't really, I think, jive very well with how the story kind of happened. So it was just kind of a weird thing to introduce that I don't think really had the kind of the punch to the story I was expecting to see.
Well, not to mention too, because the guy who had the information wasn't even on the ship, right?
Yes.
So it was like,
well, we saw briefly, right? He bumped into him.
Oh yeah, that's right.
On the
that's
ship.
Right.
Yeah, he bumped into them. But yes, like for all intents and purposes, it didn't work out that well. Obviously, you had some of those comedic beats, like Nathan Fillion, I think had kind of a fun role there, and we saw some other characters have kind of some of those roles. It just overall kind of felt like kind of an odd thing. Like, why create this like weird, like super organic station to have people come in? Like, it just kind of felt very odd. So, I mean, I guess that's kind of on par for Guardians. They are kind of known for that. I just think that it just felt kind of weird with everything going on, and you have kind of this weird organic space station that they're trying to steal something from, and in the backdrop, like the majority of the time, it's just Peter Quill and Gamora having kind of this argument the whole way, and it just kind of, as that kind of felt odd. So that was kind of my kind of not necessarily a terrible moment. It was just I think kind of odd looking back on it.
It was a bit of a head scratcher.
Digest the movie.
Yeah. I mean, I will say this. I mean, the fact that they could grow a spaceship out of I wouldn't even say human flesh, but organic flesh. It was a bit too much for me, because at that point I was like, all right, they've really gone into uncharted territory here, and frankly I don't like it. It kind of reminds me of Dead Space almost. The entire ship just like composed of flesh, and you're cutting into it, and well, remember that one scene where they blow the lock, and I don't know what it was. It looked like pus just like coming out, and I'm like, and I'm sitting there. I'm like, thank God I am not eating anything right now, because I would be blowing chunks all over the floor. But to wrap up on this review, what's your overall score for the movie? If you had to give it, out of 5, what would yours be?
I would give it. I'm gonna say 3 point. I'm gonna give it 3.4 out of 5. I think it had its moments. I think I still enjoyed seeing the side characters. Like, I felt like they got a good opportunity there to really flesh things out. I just wish that I would have liked to see a little bit more out of Peter Quill and Gamora's story. It just kind of felt like they brought it in just to kind of at the end. It was just like, shit happens. This isn't going to be the way it's going to be. So I felt like there just was opportunity there. So yeah, I give it 3/4 of a Star Lord. I mean, 3.4 Star Lords out of 5.
Well, I'm going to see your 3.4 Star Lords, and I'm going to go 3.2. And the reason why is because yes, it was a great movie overall. Yes, it hit all the emotional buttons, but I felt there were some scenes and situations that kind of overstayed their welcome.
Yes.
For instance, and I mentioned this earlier. Quill kept hammering Gamora about their relationship. My God, how many times do we have to keep hearing that? I mean, and not to mention the other running gags like Cosmo kept nagging on Kraglin saying, "Well, you need to call me a good dog. You need to call me a good dog. He didn't call me a good dog." And I'm like, okay, I can see how hurtful that is, but do you have to keep mentioning that over and over again?
I forgot about Kraglin. I totally forgot about Kraglin because it was bloated, right? So I totally forgot about Kraglin because like he has this whole story beat of him using like the little weapon. But I totally forgot about that because it was just like another thing trying to shove into this movie. So thanks for mentioning Kraglin. I totally forgot about him.
And you know what this reminded me of? It reminded me of Game of Thrones season 8, because how many years did they have to plan that out? What, 2 years before we got season 8? And James Gunn got fired. What was it, 2019 or 2020 by Disney, and he got reinstated. But by that point, he was already working for DC on the Suicide Squad. So I felt like in those intervening years, they could have, you could have sat down, and carefully plotted everything. It felt, to your point, it felt like everything kind of got dumped in there. But at the same time,
it could have been a two-parter. I'm just gonna say that
exactly. And what I also want to add too is that, is that I don't feel all of those additions were necessarily James Gunn's fault. I felt like Marvel probably would have been looking over his shoulder, would have been like, maybe you should add this, maybe you should, omit this, maybe we should develop, do more with this character because because it'll get people, talking about it, which is what we're doing right now. But I felt overall there were just it was an emotional roller coaster, and frankly, it didn't need to be, because when we've watched the last 2 Guardians movies, we've walked away feeling pretty good overall. We walked away feeling good and said, saying, I enjoyed it. I really liked, an hour and 30 minutes of entertainment. Here, here you kind of have mixed feelings because you really don't know, what to take from it, because yes, some characters get closure, others don't. And for me, I kind of feel like if everybody's going to get, if some people are going to get closure, it would make sense that everybody gets some form of closure. I mean, I guess you can say Quill does get his by meeting his grandfather, but that still leaves the whole Gamora and Quill thing up in the air.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, that's our review of Guardians of the Galaxy. Lee, did you have anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think we talked about everything I could think of, and yeah, hopefully, I guess we'll see what happens in the future. I personally, I don't want to see them continue to rehash the Guardians. I hope if they do anything with them, it's more in a minor capacity or just kind of like a touch base cameo. I don't want to see like another trilogy or even another kind of series with these characters. I feel like you're just milking it after a while. So
Lee,
I hope it doesn't go down that path. So I guess
Lee,
we'll
remember what they did with Star Wars. Okay, we all thought the original trilogy was done, and then they made 2 more. So
trust me, I totally understand, and I'm not. I certainly do agree that they're probably not done with it yet. I mean, even the ending said like, "Hey, Star Lord's going to return." So I mean, like they were pretty straightforward with what that is. Like I said, I just hope that it's not something where we're kind of like restarted, because I think that's kind of like an issue with even Marvel as a whole, right? Like I think we all enjoy the Avengers, and now it feels like we're trying to like recast and bring people in and kind of like push people into different roles. And I don't know about you, but I just don't really, not really a huge fan of it. So I'm hoping that, as I said, if we do see any more of the Guardians, I hope it's more of a minor or a side role. I just don't want to see kind of a continuation or seeing more and more, unless there's something where they feel like they could tell a good story, bringing all the characters back together. Like if you find a reason to be like, hey, like the new the new Guardians get captured, and they have to kind of bring everyone back together, and like, you know, maybe Star-Lord's out of shape because he hasn't been doing anything, and you know, maybe Gamora is a little bit more ruthless. So like I think that there's kind of some fun things you could do with that if you're to bring the characters back, but I would like to see the original ones come back. I don't want to see kind of just the new ones all come together, just to kind of create a new trilogy with, you know, the, you know, 2.0 version of the Guardians. So, but I guess we'll see what happens. Only time will tell. Time and money. So we'll have to see how that all turns out.
All right. Well, next week we are going to be reviewing the Super Mario Brothers movies. So remember to like, comment, subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. And take it easy.